Greetings, dear viewers. You are on the Cross Motor channel. Throughout history, motorcycles have been equipped with all kinds of engines. Internal combustion engines, whether gasoline, diesel, gas generator, and so on, as well as steam, electric, and jet engines. Internal combustion engines come in many configurations based on cylinder number and arrangement, from common inline, V and boxer engines to rare motorcycle types like radial, W-shaped, and H-shaped engines. There is such a thing as a so-called square engine. In English, this term is called square 4, and it appears in the names of several models of equipment with this type of engine. This is a 4-cylinder unit with the cylinders positioned at the corners of a square. We'll look at the design in more detail as we go along. And only a very small number of motorcycle models were equipped with such engines. I invite you to hear a few words about motorcycles with a square 4. Get comfortable, this will be interesting. Before I begin the story, I want to clarify one thing. In engine building, there is a parallel term, square engine, which means an equal ratio of cylinder bore to piston stroke. However, in this story, we're interested in a square engine in terms of its layout, meaning the arrangement of the cylinders relative to each other. Such an engine is a real rarity in engineering and is a 4-cylinder, 2- or 4-stroke power unit with 2 crankshafts connected by a mechanical drive. In this story, it's basically 2 parallel twins merged together with a 180-degree firing angle to balance the square engine. These twins are in opposite phases, and the square 4 is a special case of a U-shaped engine. Here is an animation of such an engine. These are 2 inline engines mounted in parallel, with both crankshafts transmitting torque to one common shaft. The advantage of this layout is the absence of a gyroscopic effect, since the crankshafts rotate in opposite directions, compensating for each other, and the possibility of unification with inline engines. However, there is also a significant drawback. A V-type engine with the same number of cylinders and displacement will be cheaper to manufacture, lighter, and more compact, while the torque output will not differ much. It is precisely because of the complexity, high cost, large dimensions, and greater resource consumption that this type of engine ended up being extremely rare. Continued. The world's first U-type engine was built by the Frenchman Ettore Bugatti in 1915 and was called the Bugatti U16. The goal was to outperform their own inline-8 engine. The engine was designed for aviation and, as you may have guessed, has 16 cylinders. The engine had a displacement of 24.3 liters and produced 410 horsepower. Between 1915 and 1918, about 40 of these power units were planned to be produced, but both versions of this engine turned out to be not very successful. Only a small number of them were installed on airplanes, and even fewer actually took to the air. In 1917, a delegation from the United States arrived in France with the goal of selecting an engine for the aviation department of the Signal Corps, which would be produced under license in the United States. They became interested in the U-16, and soon a production license was purchased. By the late 1910s, an American-made engine of the U-16 configuration appeared. However, after the end of World War I, their further development in the United States stalled. But in France, the company Breguet acquired a license for this type of engine and produced it in the early 1920s. The U-shaped engine first appeared in a car in 1927. The racing model Fiat 806 was equipped with a U12 engine with a 1.5-liter supercharger. During testing, the unit produced 187 horsepower at maximum power at 8,500 RPM with maximum boost. The Fiat 806 car participated in only one race, the Milan Grand Prix, for 500 kilometers on September 4, 1927. Fiat won this race, but for unknown reasons, the 806 did not participate in further Grand Prix races. A U-shaped car design again. The car was built on the chassis of the Type 35 Grand Prix, and the engine consisted of two supercharged inline 8s joined together. From the Type 35, they created a U16 with a displacement of 3.8 liters and 250 horsepower, but the design was not successful. The U16 turned out to be powerful enough, but it was too heavy for a sports car. The same fate awaited the second Bugatti of this design, the Type 47. As a result, seeing no clear benefit, Ettore stopped developing engines of this concept. In the 1930s, the Swiss company Sulzer Brothers began producing the diesel U12 for railway locomotives. During World War II, about 10,000 American Sherman tanks were equipped with the U-shaped two-stroke diesel engine, General Motors 6046. After World War II, some Soviet tanks used 16 and 18-cylinder engines, which were redesigned from the General Motors engine. In addition to the huge 12, 16, and 18-cylinder engines of this configuration, the U4 version did not gain much popularity. It became popular specifically on motorcycles, and due to the distinctive arrangement of the four cylinders, it was called the square foam. Also, on a number of motorcycles in the 1970s and 1980s, the U2 engine configuration was used. Kawasaki was highly successful in this regard. Its racing machines with such engines won 4 world championships in the 250cc class and 4 in the 350cc class. A little later, such an engine appeared at Rotex, and many companies and racing teams installed it. But we've gotten a bit sidetracked. Someday, I'll tell you about the U2 on motorcycles in a separate episode. So, the Square 4. Let's get acquainted with the motorcycles equipped with this power unit. The British Ariel Square was the first motorcycle with a Square 4 engine, debuting at the 1930 Olympia exhibition. The model entered production in 1931. This excellent example of British motorcycle engineering was produced with various modifications all the way up to 1959, which means 30 years in a row. There was only one break in the production of this model, the Second World War. During that time, Ariel focused on things that would help bring Britain closer to victory in the war. The company's single-cylinder motorcycles were widely used in the Army, and from 1931 to 1959, a total of 15,639 Square 4 motorcycles rolled off the factory assembly line. This machine could just as easily have been made under the Birmingham Small Arms brand rather than Ariel. Now you'll find out why this unique motorcycle, or more precisely its engine, was developed by the talented Briton Edward Turner. Edward was born in 1901 and became interested in engine building and motorcycles as early as his youth, when he was 24 years old. The Motorcycle magazine had already written about him and his overhead valve single-cylinder engine. The guy was extremely talented, but not wealthy. To earn money and keep his blueprints from collecting dust, Turner offered his idea to major British motorcycle manufacturers. The management at Birmingham Small Arms wasn't impressed by Edward's ideas and rejected his proposal, but the Ariel company gladly accepted his development. And shortly after, the industrialist John Young Sangster, also known as Jack Sangster, who owned a controlling stake in Ariel, invited Edward Turner to the company. That's how the unique and charismatic British motorcycle, the Ariel Square 4, came to be. Although it was capable of setting records, it was designed as a touring motorcycle for long and comfortable rides. Its engine was especially smooth and had minimal vibrations, as well as high reliability. However, since it was air-cooled, there was a problem with overheating in the rear row of cylinders. The 1931 Square 4 engine had a 500cc displacement, which was increased to 600cc the following year. To increase its potential and make it possible to use the motorcycle with a sidecar, the 600cc model in 1932 covered 1,127 kilometers in 670 minutes during a test run, with an average speed of 101 kilometers per hour. Another rather amusing marketing move was the Ariel's 7 test. The idea was that 7 school children were each asked to start it 7 times. As a result, in 48 out of 49 cases, the motorcycle started on the first kick. This version of the motorcycle, called the 4F, was produced until 1936. In 1936, due to the problem of overheating of the rear cylinders, the engine was significantly redesigned, and the new unit had a displacement of 995 cc. This motorcycle, indexed 4G, was made until 1949. Since 1946, a telescopic front fork was installed on this machine. From 1949 to 1953, a new version was produced. The engine received an aluminum cylinder head, and its power was 35 horsepower at 5,500 revolutions per minute. Mark I reached a maximum speed of 145 km/h. The last version of the Square 4 was the Mark II, which was produced from 1953 to 1959. The engine power increased to 40 horsepower, and the top speed reached 160 km/h. In 1959, production of this charismatic motorcycle was discontinued, as well as all other 4-stroke models by Ariel. It was all due to the looming crisis in the British motorcycle industry. The expensive, complex Square 4 couldn't compete with the simpler, lighter, and most importantly, cheaper motorcycles of that era. The next motorcycle model with a Square 4 engine was the Hilly 1004, which debuted in 1971. Yes, it's another British motorcycle. It closely resembles the Ariel motorcycles, and yes, there is a direct connection here. 2 British men and brothers, George and Tim Hilly, were motorcycle enthusiasts and huge fans of the Square 4 model from Ariel. Throughout the entire 1960s, these 2 men improved the British company's Leader Class 4s, culminating in a motorcycle designed for sprinting, the British equivalent of drag racing with supercharging, which doubled the output compared to the original engine, using a large number of spare parts from Ariel. The Hilly brothers started making the Hilly 1000/4 motorcycle in 1971, a reimagined version of the Square 4. Work was bustling in a small Redditch workshop near Birmingham. The staff included the Hilly brothers, mechanic Paul Mayhew, and a secretary, only 4 people total. Needless to say, the products were produced in extremely limited numbers. By the 1970s, the original design from Ariel was already quite outdated. The brothers' idea was to install a modernized engine into a contemporary chassis, and the Square 4 was refined. The Hilly brothers improved the lubrication system by upgrading the oil pump and enlarging the filter. They also added an oil cooler to improve cooling. The engine power was increased from 40 to 52 horsepower by using a new camshaft and raising the compression ratio. The upgraded engine was installed in a frame very similar to those designed by Fritz Egli. Don't know who that is? Here's a pop-up hint about this story. The result was a solid machine, weighing 160 kg dry and reaching a top speed of 200s. The motorcycle debuted at Earl's Court in 1971 and was well received. However, all this happened in the midst of the British motorcycle industry's crisis by the mid-70s. The brothers realized that their creation is not able to compete with Japanese motorcycles. The Hilly workshop closed in 1977 when only 28 finished motorcycles had been produced. Let's rewind to 1968. Honda was the first among the Japanese Big Four to introduce its superbike, and that motorcycle was the CB750FO model. Kawasaki, like others then, aimed to make the fastest production motorcycle. But the flagship Mach 3 with its 3-cylinder 2-stroke 500cc engine from 1969 was outperformed in Kawasaki's lineup by Honda's inline 4. The question of how to surpass the competitors becomes urgent. Work intensified, and by 1971, the company introduced the Mach 4 with a 750cc inline triple, and a year later the 900cc Z1 appeared. However, during this competitive struggle, in 1972, another interesting motorcycle appeared, which the company's management would later not bet on, and it would remain a prototype. This was the Kawasaki 750 Square FO. While developing this model, the engineers led by the father of the Mach, Hiroyuki Matsumoto, not only aimed to create the fastest and most powerful production motorcycle, but also sought to make a universal model. To improve aerodynamics, they chose a 4-cylinder square engine. It was a 2-stroke, and for effective heat dissipation, liquid cooling was used, which eliminated overheating of the rear cylinders. The Japanese may have gotten the idea from the British Ariel. Work on the prototype was going well, but in August 1973 it was halted. The reason was the tightening of emission standards in the United States. Since the 2-stroke Square 4 didn't meet standards, it made sense for the company to focus on the 4-stroke Z1. The story of the Kawasaki Square 4 750 model turned out to be very short. Unfortunately, not many prototypes in this world are so lucky. Another period of prosperity for the Square 4 came in the second half of the 70s and the early 80s. At that time, a number of manufacturers placed their bets on this engine for Grand Prix motorcycles. You'll find out what came of it now. The well-deserved pioneer in this niche was Suzuki. The Suzuki RG 500 became a true racing icon of the 70s. The motorcycle raced in the 500cc Grand Prix from 1974 to 1980 and was highly successful during that time. With 100 horsepower, the lightweight, agile Suzuki could reach up to 305 km/h on straightaways. The RG 500 won 7 consecutive manufacturers' titles and became the favorite motorcycle of private racers in the late 70s. The RG 500, introduced in 1976, enabled private racers to join the World Championship. Suzuki dominated the 1976 500cc World Championship, and the RG 500 claimed 11 of the top 12 spots in the Premier class from 1981 to 1984. A new version of the RG 500 Gamma was produced for racing. The bike debuted in 1981 and won 2 consecutive Riders' Championships. And so, seeing Suzuki's near-total dominance, a number of manufacturers set their sights on the Square 4. However, imitating a successful design does not guarantee the same success. Only the Suzuki RG 500 achieved many victories and titles, despite the new RG 500 Grand Prix's huge popularity. In 1985, Suzuki created the civilian motorcycle RG 500 Gamma, which would be produced up until 1987. In fact, it was a race motorcycle adapted for riding on public roads, with the same square 500cc liquid-cooled engine. Motorsport in the middle of the last century was developing very rapidly, and during this period, some racers decided to build their own motorcycles for racing. One of them was Giancarlo Morbidelli, who was one of the few amateurs whose motorcycles achieved a lot of victories. Gradually, the hobby evolved into making top-tier racing machines. Amid Grand Prix wins, 5 in 125cc and 1 in 250cc, Giancarlo decided to enter the elite 500cc class. Thus, in 1979, the Morbidelli 500 model appeared. The Square 4 engine of this motorcycle produced 130 horsepower, and the engine was mounted in a lightweight aluminum frame. Graziano Rossi, Valentino's father, rode this motorcycle. And despite having more power than the Suzuki, the 500's success was limited due to the high center of gravity of its design. Graziano struggled with this all season and didn't score a single point in the Grand Prix. The later 500 model with a V4 engine was equally disappointing. In 1979, Kawasaki, experienced with square 4 engines, chose to build a Grand Prix motorcycle using this design. A year later, the motorcycle was completed and named the KR 500. The monocoque frame was structurally very similar to the Morbidelli design. The engine produced 120 horsepower and was paired with a 6-speed gearbox, allowing the motorcycle to reach speeds of up to 290 kilometers per hour. In 1980, the best result for the KR 500 was 5th place in the final. Riders noted that the bike had competitive power, but it was somewhat longer than its competitors, which reduced its maneuverability, and it was on average 15 kilograms heavier. By the 1981 season, the bike was made somewhat lighter, while also solving a number of aerodynamic and chassis issues. That year, the best result was 3rd place in a race. By 1982, the motorcycle got a completely new chassis. Despite all the upgrades and improvements, the KR 500 never achieved racing glory, and by the end of 1982, it was discontinued. To be continued. San Venero 500 Grand Prix is an Italian story about small victories, crazy engineering, and bankruptcy. During its short existence, San Venero won 3 Grand Prix races, once in the 500cc class and twice in the 125cc class. The founder of the team was construction magnate Emilio Sanvenero. Emilio became passionate about racing and wanted to be like his fellow countryman, successful racing machine manufacturer Giancarlo Morbidelli. So on September 1, 1980, without any hesitation, Sanvenero formed his own team, which included many talented engineers from Morbidelli and Benelli. Sanvenero. He quickly chose to create 2 racing motorcycle classes, 125 and 500. 125. This is straightforward, it's entry level. But why jump into the 500cc class, where you'll face tough competition from giants like Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki? It's all about media exposure. Today, our country has many sports television channels, YouTube, TikTok, and more. But back then, Italian television only broadcasted Grand Prix races in the 500cc class. Emilio wanted a motorcycle with his last name on the fairing to appear on television, thus advertising his business. It's not exactly known why they chose a square 4 engine. Maybe it was influenced by a similar motorcycle from Morbidelli, or perhaps Suzuki. The 500 made its debut in 1981, but during that season, the Sanvenera 500 finished only 2 races. Some sources call the Sanvenera 500 a Suzuki RG 500 clone, but their engine designs differ. The Sanvenera had 2 crankshafts, while the Suzuki used 4 separate crank pins. The Italian 500's engine delivered 120 horsepower, propelling the motorcycle to 260 km/h. In 1982, this motorcycle won in Nogaro. That year, the Sanvenera turned out to be ahead. It was on this track that a mass protest by riders took place due to the bumpy surface and the very cramped paddock. 15 factory riders refused to participate, and these were the strongest participants. This event made the victory in Sanvenera possible, but by that time, dark clouds were already gathering over the Italian company. The team's financial problems arose due to a downturn in Emilio's construction business. This event prompted Sanvenera to look for a buyer for their team while participating in the German Grand Prix. All of the team's equipment was seized by bailiffs. That's how 2 out of the 3 Sanvenera 500 Grand Prix motorcycles ended up in the Hockenheim Racetrack Museum, where one of them remains to this day. Let's go back to Japan. The Yamaha team performed quite successfully in the Grand Prix, including in the 500cc class with the YZR 500 motorcycle, which was produced in various modifications from 1973 to 2002. I should note that during this long period, the YZR was equipped with engines of various configurations. We are interested in the 0W-54 version from 1981-82. This was a racing machine with a square 4 engine. Kenny Roberts rode the 0W-54 to back-to-back wins at the West German and Italian Grands Prix in 1981. However, a series of setbacks then caused Roberts to finish the season in third place. Meanwhile, Barry Sheene, who was also riding the Square 4 from the fourth round at the French Grand Prix, won the final round at the Swedish Grand Prix. As a result, the company with the crossed tuning forks switched from the Square 4 to the lighter V4 as early as 1982. After 1987, no motorcycle manufacturer equipped their bikes with a U4 engine layout. Economic feasibility put everything in its place. Lighter and more powerful engine layouts, like the inline engines, proved to be more successful in racing. In civilian motorcycle manufacturing, preference was given to simpler engines. The complex, heavier, and more material-intensive U4 remained in history as a bright and interesting chapter. At the moment, there are no indications that any motorcycle brand is preparing a modern reinterpretation of the Square 4 in a motorcycle frame. That's it, friends. My story comes to an end. As usual, this was the CrossMoto channel with you, and I sincerely want to thank you for supporting my work. Without the time you spend watching and your activity in the form of likes and reposts, my efforts would be meaningless. Special thanks to everyone who supports the channel financially using the details provided in the description. See you next time. Goodbye.